In a vast wasteland of entertainment where radio has become obsolete, stands an embittered man teetering at the edge of sanity. With help from radio friends, he's about to embark on a global mission that would change the course of history as we know it. Broadcasting live from the secret studios on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware is Mitchel K.C. Hill. And up to the Great White North in Vancouver is Alexander Knight.
All right, here's our first show, and thank you, me. That was me introducing me. So that sounds kind of petty, but it's our first show. I want to introduce the producer of the show, Mr. Alexander Knight from the Great White North. Alexander is here as the producer and the co-host of the program, and we'll bring our first guest in a moment. But for now, Alexander, you have anything you want to say other than that you hate daylight savings?
Oh, it's the worst. I have to say I pass judgment on people that think that daylight savings time is a good time, but I don't want to go into the whole show, that whole thing, and waste a bunch of people's time with that. But we need to put a stop to it. That's all I'll say. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, they can't even make up their mind in the political house down the river in Washington. So who knows what's going on? And I want to introduce our first guest who's going to be joining us today. His name is Stephen Streiker. Stephen is a person that's been in the radio business. Yeah, good to have you here, Stephen.
Call me Steve. Pretty much only my mother calls me Stephen. My late
Stephen?
mother.
Stephen, what have you been doing?
Stephen,
what have you been doing with that dog?
Exactly.
There you go. And Stephen, how would you explain what you do now versus what I know you from in the beginning? Because we got on the radio about the same time, way back when, and we were sort of like a friends, admiring broadcasting. Wouldn't that be a cool thing to have as a job? What do you do now? As far as
I had my early career in the radio business, and I enjoyed it immensely. I was the Q man in the Q van at 96 Super Q WLEQ in Fort Myers, Florida. But I'm a lawyer. That's what I do. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Law, and I work in technology law. I'm a technology lawyer and corporate lawyer.
What are all those things next to your name title that show up there? The CIFTI, TCI, FDIC.
Well,
CIFTI, what do those things stand
I'm a
for?
certified information privacy professional.
What's that mean?
That and $8 will get you a Starbucks, right?
Nice.
Certified information. It's the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And it's a worldwide organization of people that are not just lawyers, but people that work in companies and institutions and who are concerned with privacy practices to protect people's personally identifiable information around the world and deal with the regulatory machinery around that's increasingly becoming more complicated across the world. And I, sat for the exam. It's sort of like taking the bar exam. It's another one of the, it's sort of like there's a bunch of computer server, certified Microsoft, but professionals and things like that. I have a couple other certifications. I have agile certification in software development because I've supported software developers, and I'm also certified in at a low level. I don't have the high level certification in AWS. Google Cloud and Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud and environment, software development, only because I support those people.
And the reason we brought you in is that, first of all, we've known each other for many, many years. So I want you here to provide a little bit of context for why I'm the last angry DJ. And also, you just seem to be a master of everything.
Well, I don't know about that.
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, you're very well spoken. You know a lot about everything, just like Alexander does. He knows a whole bunch of it. So let me just give sort of the ground rules of what this program is. The last angry DJ is sort of me, and the second to last angry DJ so far is Alexander Knight. Alexander is a little younger than I am by about 30 years. Certainly culturally and other. Would you be a millennial, Alexander? Or
I'm right at the beginning of that. I was born in 1982, so yes, I technically qualify, but I'm right at the outer edge of the start of that for sure.
You look like a millennial, and you have hair, which is something I don't have. So one of the cool things about this program is going to be the contrast between the culture that I guess Steve and I grew up in, and the culture that's out now, and how we don't fit in. We're sort of like an odd man out trying to be politically correct, not to be part of the woke generation. It totally mystifies us. I'm telling you, folks, if you know somebody that's older, the culture they were brought up into, where it was completely different. The TV shows we watched, the people we related to, the names we used, the pronouns we used, don't fit into today's society. And it brings a number of complicated what-if scenarios that mystifies boomers. You know, if you're a boomer, you're totally mystified. You don't fit in. So maybe that's another reason why I'm a little bit angry. And I'm only angry because I just don't fit in anymore. And I spent a lot of time being very hip and very cool back in the day when I was a disc jockey on some local radio stations. Stephen and I worked at one of them, WAMS Radio here in
1380 WAMS.
That's us. 1380.
Now it's
Super
the
WAMS.
number one low-powered traffic alerting service for the state of Delaware.
Yeah, the only way you can hear that station is you got to tune it in on your car radio, and you're hitting into traffic in Christiana. And occasionally, I'm going to mention that we're doing localisms for our friends that live in the Mid-Atlantic region, certainly in Delaware. They may not know some of the references, particularly in Canada. If we go up to Alexander's neck of the woods, some of these things may make absolutely no sense. Alexander, what was the big radio stations you used to listen to growing up?
Well, the one of the biggest radio rock stations here, and they're still quite big, is 99.3 CFOX. Now, it's interesting. They always have at the bottom of their logo, the slogan that they go by is the world famous CFOX. And I always pose the question, is it really the world's greatest radio station? I don't know. Like, are they that well known all over the world? Could I go into a small village in some country on the other side of the world and you know what CFOX is? I question that. But they were a great radio station, and they had lots of personalities.
It's like going to a restaurant and they have the world famous soup of the day. You know, like people from all over the world are beating feet to somebody in Lickskillet, Alabama for that world famous soup. I think that's just a branding and marketing ploy, so to speak. And
absolutely.
We used to always say in radio, there are two kinds of radio stations out there, us and the assholes. Can I say that?
I want to go back.
I didn't want to kick off the show by being potty mouthed here, so go ahead.
That's okay. One of the things I want to go back to, because again, we're setting the premise here for what this show is supposed to be, and I'm really glad that we're doing this. I'm excited to do this show with you, Mitch, because and with all the wonderful guests that we're going to be bringing on, because I think we need to bridge the gap between people from a previous generation that worked in radio and people that are just up and coming now and a lot younger, because there are clearly differences. The industry has changed. We're going to be talking a little bit about that, and I'm sure we'll hear some war stories from you, Mitch, over the years in your job there in the past, and from our guests. But I really want to talk about how the industry has changed and how it needs to evolve in order to survive. Because, people keep saying, well, radio's dying, or they just say radio's dead right now. And I'm not so sure about that. There are plenty of numbers out there now that people publish that show that radio is still actually listened to actively by millions and millions of people all over, at least the United States and Canada. And but I know it is a problem. It is a problem getting listenership from newer audience members that are maybe a lot younger that don't really listen to it anymore. Because it used to be that, we listened to radio a lot, not just for talk radio to hear our favorite personalities, but we used to listen to it for music. And now that's really gone away with streaming. And now, I know for me, I would never listen to the radio for music because the quality of the audio is terrible, and I'm an audiophile, I'm a snob, so I don't really want to listen to it. And also on the talk radio side, some of my favorite personalities just aren't there anymore, or they've been diminished. And when I listen to the radio now, where are those personalities? A lot of it is, and I listen to a lot of radio stations here to see what's going on and get put my finger on the pulse of what's going on. And it's boring. They're not taking risks anymore. they're not being edgy in any way. So I want to ask the two of you as well, how do you guys see it right now?
Let me kick it. Yeah, we're going to kick it, Steve, because I think it all started with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the internet. Why don't you explain what that is?
Well,
Steve?
obviously the radio business changed with the Communications Act of '96, the nature of the ownership of radio companies and the capital structure that supported it. But, you know, there are, certainly are millions of people queuing to radio, because not everybody has 100% of their day on Amazon Music or XM Sirius. But the economics have changed, and even though I was on the air at radio stations, that wasn't my primary job. My main career, I worked for Arbitron, and I worked as an average sales manager. I worked for Capital Broadcasting, and I worked at some very successful 1980s adult contemporary radio stations, and we made a lot of money moving a lot of people from AM, which was dying as a music source medium, to FM stations in places like Birmingham, where we had Magic 96, and I also put on my 102.5 in Greenville, South Carolina. But we didn't have the internet and Google selling ability to I get targeted with ads that are clearly targeting down to my house, okay, down to me specifically. And we used to talk about radio as a target medium, and it was. And when I was at Arbitron, that was our sell. Every station has a demographic, and it's much more efficient.
Why don't you explain what Arbitron is, so that people
in the old days, it's now known as Nielsen Audio, but in the old days, it was the preeminent rating service. There was another one called Birch Radio that tried to compete with us.
Tommy Birch.
Yeah, Tommy Birch, Ray Quinn's brother-in-law. But the economics underpinning radio stations, there isn't as much money flowing into the ad budgets and buys. A lot of that money's been diverted to online advertising, and that's why you have Clear Channel in bankruptcy, and other broadcast entities just not meeting their numbers. They owe a lot of money to their investors and the banks, and they do not have the cash flow that they projected 20 years ago, clearly.
So the seeds of this was that radio used to be the only way you could be exposed to new music, because there was no internet. And you could go to a jukebox in a club, or you could listen to the radio, and usually there was a top 40 radio station, top 40 being basically playing the 40 top radio songs that were out there. And that's how you got exposed to new music. And if you heard something you liked, you'd listen to the radio. You went to the record store. In our case, we'd go to Woolworths and buy a 45 of that single that we heard. And that was the way the system worked, that you got exposed to music. Nowadays, there are so many alternate choices, and radio is not one of them. You're not going to a radio station to be exposed to new music. You're going to Spotify or Pandora or some other streaming service. And the other, in combination with that, the fact that the ownership of radio is not the mom and pop business that it used to be, like Steve was talking about. It's now owned by 5 major conglomerates.
Yeah,
like
there still
iHeart.
are stations owned by individual entities around the United States, but 80% of the radio stations are owned by 5 group owners, or so. I don't know if that's the number. I'm just pulling
It's
that
about
out
right.
there.
It's good for purposes of demonstration.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way they run these stations, and to Alexander's point, they pretty much cookie cutter the stations across the country, playing the same music with the same approach, the same DJs, the same national program directors, and they pretty much all sound the same, no matter where they are.
Well, that's because they're all voice tracked by 49 different people.
Yeah.
And they have the same, music playlists. And
and that makes me angry.
Angry, you should be, but it's not. I don't know what you're going to be able to do about that. I mean, I have a 36-year-old son, and I cannot remember. He does not listen to radio. I mean, when he comes to visit, or I go visit him, the car, which used to be the main place that we would spend a lot of time spent listening, he's listening to Spotify or Pandora or whatever his, I don't know which one of Apple Music, whatever his source of of programming is. I don't listen to I live in Tampa, Florida, and metro market, and I don't listen to the terrestrial radio, but just to make sure my car radio works once in a while. And I listen to XM Sirius. I'm a big podcast listener on technology and politics. I'm active in democratic politics, and that's 80% of my time spent listening that I would have been listening to talk radio in the old days,
100%.
or listening to terrestrial radio, and I don't.
So where do you listen, Alexander, to find new music?
Yeah,
What's
so
your,
for me, I mean, I do listen to streaming music, certainly, not as much as other people, because I'm a bit of a vinyl guy. So the majority of my stuff, I'm all analog. I'm spinning vinyl. And when new stuff comes out, I certainly listen to a lot of new music that comes out on streaming, just because it is convenient. But that's certainly where I spend most of my time. And Stephen, actually, you mentioned podcasts too. That's obviously a big part of a lot of people's daily listening too. And I know a lot of veteran people that worked in radio now have their own podcasts. So I've kind of moved from terrestrial myself to following my favorite heroes to their own podcast. So, and I don't know if that necessarily makes radio irrelevant, but clearly it seems to be for a lot of new people, a whole new generation. So it's obviously a problem because radio stations rely on ad dollars, and also ad dollars is drying up too. I mean, there's arguments for that in podcasting too, because actually a lot of ad spends have actually shrunk quite a bit. I hear this all the time from people that have been doing this for the better part of the last 15 years or so, since podcasts were just starting to be a thing. So I think we're feeling the pain in both industries. I think both podcasts and radio are going through some teething pain, and we all need to adapt. I mean, you could also say that, I think, for any industry, it's adapt or die, and we need to figure out ways to stay relevant. I'm not sure what the answer is for terrestrial radio. Certainly, I mean, Sirius is probably an anomaly because they're doing it pretty well, and they are pretty successful at it when they have Howard Stern on the face of their website. And I imagine a lot of people probably pay for Sirius XM just to hear him. Now, if they get some streaming music in there, that's just icing on the cake. But I think Howard Stern is a huge part of what generates revenue for that company. That's just my opinion. I don't have access. I don't have any kind of insider information there.
Yeah, Howard is an anomaly. He's one of the original shock jocks, going back to Don Imus at NBC, and Howard worked there also. We could devote an entire show to Howard Stern and what it is that makes him what he is. But I think that a lot of Howard's interest was, what is he going to do next? What is he going to say next? He's in trouble all the time with the FCC. Let's listen, because he seems to be the anti-radio guy. And that made it interesting. I'm not trying to be that here. I never tried to be it back then. We were always kind of edgy. That was our thing, to try to seem like we were breaking rules without actually breaking them. That was what personality was all about. But I agree. I think that radio today is a lot more safe in terms of its presentation, because we live in a safe world where you can't go. I mean, I listen to some old air checks, that's old recordings of my radio shows, and they wouldn't stand up in today's society. I'd be canceled pretty quickly.
Well,
and
I think not
we
only
might
that.
play some.
Mitch, it's not just that. I mean, look, I'm an old man now, so we don't judge the media taste of people that we used to. My grandfather used to comment on the radio station I worked for when I was in my 20s. He couldn't stand it. Well, of course he couldn't. He was my age at the time. But I occasionally tune over and force myself. Okay, I got to listen to because I moved here about a year and a half ago, and it's like, oh, I want to listen to the local radio stations. Well, it's tough to listen to radio when you tune in. There's 16 minutes of commercials before they play a record. And, I don't have to put up with that anymore. Now, in the old days, I had to wait through the spot set, because when I was a sales manager at the top ACs in the markets that I was a sales manager, the other radio stations programmed their spot sets in a way against ours, so that we would the listeners would return to us. or everybody had commercials, so you just had to wait through the cluster before on that radio station, because when you push the button, the other station had commercials too. But nowadays, you do not have to wait 13 minutes to listen to music when I can push Amazon. It's my choice, Amazon Music, and just listen to tunes.
And that's sort of affecting everything in
huge part of it.
broadcast TV. The same thing. It's affecting. You really don't tolerate commercials. When you stop, think about it. You're watching an action thriller, and all of a sudden there's this cliffhanger moment, and they cut away for a commercial. Stop to think about it. It's kind of weird. That's weird. And
we think it's weird now, but that was just the way the landscape worked. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Alex. Yeah, I was going to say. You're right.
Behaviors have changed.
I mean, do you tolerate commercials anymore, or do you
prefer
to
I
pay for a service?
If I have the option, I will pay to get rid of ads. I pay for YouTube Premium, for example. And YouTube is completely intolerable with ads to me. I mean, when I go to my parents' house and they're watching YouTube, there's ads coming on every few seconds and interrupting the video. I just don't. It's a dumpster fire to me. I don't understand how anybody even tolerates that. So I think this is a nuanced problem, and I think one of the things that is affecting radio greatly is just our behaviors have changed now. We don't tolerate ads like we used to, right? A lot of people, there's going to be a whole new generation now growing up that has never even once had a cable TV subscription. It's all on demand. And so if you try to present to them this old world medium that is based on all of these advertising and commercials and all this sort of stuff, radio's a very old format, and I think it has a very limited future. I'm not saying it's going to go away entirely. I think it still serves a purpose for breaking news, for traffic reports. I mean, I certainly, on my commute to work...
Well, wait a second. It does not for breaking news. I'm sorry.
No, you don't think so?
Absolutely not, because there's so many other customizable news sources than nobody's listening to KYW in Philadelphia anymore. I mean, that's not true. Not nobody, but I was listening to Keith Olbermann's podcast the other day. He plays his old air checks of his days he used to be on UPI radio, and he was playing, and the UPI radio sportscast he did had all these scores for the baseball games, be the 11 o'clock UPI sports that, maybe 4,000, maybe 2,000 stations would be carrying Mutual Radio. And we wanted those scores because that was the only place to get them, because the newspaper didn't come out till the next day. But now I could just follow it on Major League Baseball's website if I'm interested in that. Radio doesn't play any part
in a sense. What used to be called broadcasting is really narrowcasting, which means it's now broken down into very, very tight demographics and interest. And you have so many to pick from. It can be narrowcasting. Back in the day, there were 3, maybe 1 independent TV stations, and you watched whatever they wanted to show you in the sequence that they showed it to you. Nowadays, you can program and DVR it with your TiVo and watch what you want when you want to watch it.
Yeah,
that's kind of where the world's going.
I'm interested in watching a show called Shogun, and right now the only place to watch it is on FX. And I guess if I pay extra to be on Hulu, I can watch it without commercials. So I'm watching it on FX, and I have to now. It's tolerable in that it's so intense. I kind of welcome the commercial breaks because they just chop somebody's head off, and I got to recover from that. See it flying across the room. But Professor G, Scott Galloway, he was a very famous marketing professor at New York University, NYU. He's a multi-millionaire investor, and he does a show with several podcasts from his company, but including with Kara Swisher, who's the former technology editor at the New York Times. But he talks about media now is there's poor people media and rich people media. And people with above average incomes, they don't have to watch any commercials anymore. It's only poor people that have to consume media that has all these commercials on it. And I think that's the dichotomy that's affecting the terrestrial radio business. It's going to become a medium for only below average income people.
We got a chat message here from our friend Chris Alberts, a standing room, and he says that all the local news now happens on the Ring app on your phone. As soon as anything happens in the area, Dozens
Correct.
of people talking about it immediately. Thank you, Chris, for your
Or the
chat.
Starkey Ranch. I live in Starkey Ranch. It's a big planned unit community in Pasco County, north of Tampa. And our news comes off the Starkey Ranch Facebook page when something happens, an alligator on somebody's, or a Girl Scout cookie sale or whatever. That's where we go look for it.
Yeah, so I don't know if we're going to solve the problem of the things have changed. I just want to acknowledge what has changed and how that affects people. For example, I was pretty big time in the radio days. I can say that without being too prideful in doing that.
You were
And,
a big wheel at
thanks, I
famous
appreciate it. I worked
56.
in some major markets, and
Sure.
that was good. And then I left it because I realized there's no equity in that position. But anyhow, that's another long story. But I always felt that I could come back to radio if I retired and wanted to slow down a little bit and go back on the air and do the radio thing and make okay money and do it. And I asked a close friend of mine that owned or ran a big group of radio stations in the region. And I said, yeah, I think maybe I would get back on the air again after all these years. And he kind of looked at me and said, you're too old. And that's kind of struck me as something that make me angry, because I'm not necessarily angry at him or the business or what's happened. It's like things have changed that I didn't realize. It just happened around me. And all of a sudden I woke up like Rip Van Winkle, whatever his name is, Winkle. And things have changed around me, and I don't fit in quite so well.
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to briefly touch on is a lot of people that left the radio business that are our age or my age started podcasts, and some of them are kind of lame, to be honest with you. And when I sort of kicked around the idea with Alexander of doing a podcast program, I said, the one thing I do not want this to become is another lame show about some old disc jockey talking about all the good old times and they're never to be had again. I kind of want to stir it all up and say, is there a chance that this guy that used to be a pretty good communicator can fit in somehow in today's world as it has changed and be relevant and interesting? And we're going to start out by doing this podcast and find out if that is indeed true, because things have changed. A lot of it has changed around us. I mean, Alexander's here because he has a different perspective than Stephen and I do, or Steve and I do, because he wasn't brought up in the same context, the same environment that we were.
You didn't have to work at a
White North.
250-watt daytimer in Newark, Delaware, right?
Yeah, exactly. I got another local reference there. But, we grew up listening to giant radio stations in Canada. CKLW was one of them, the big Drake Chenault stations.
Sure, absolutely.
RKOs and all those. It was interesting back in those days. Our version of it was kind of a weird social media. Was at night, your AM signals would bounce all over the place due to a thing called ionosphere bouncing. Anyhow, the signal would go up and bounce off.
You would have to listen to more Anne Murray records on CKLW because they had those
Canadian content
rules.
Yeah, they got to a point in Canada where they were tired of the influence of American radio, and
Three Dog Night was on every other step.
You get the Guess Who, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Anne Murray, all the classic Canadian acts. But anyhow, before I pick on them, I just want to say that the idea was that I could hear at night stations all over the country, maybe even all over the world and in Canada. WLS in Chicago, we could hear at night. We could hear all these Clear Channel stations broadcasting WoWo in Fort Wayne, Indiana, CKLW, which you couldn't hear it during the day. And it was our way of hearing this different cultural bias from different radio stations in different areas of the country. And in a sense, it was sort of like a weird kind of internet thing that you could do it. But nowadays, AM stations are kind of like, they're hanging on by their fingernails.
Well, I don't.
Trying to be relevant.
First of all, you can't hear them because of electrical noise. The FCC has totally abdicated the control of noise in the AM spectrum from lamps and LED lamps and industrial equipment and the cars themselves. Tesla wants to get, and other car manufacturers want to get rid of the AM radios because they don't want to build in the filtering necessary for. That's why. You'll notice that in the Republican talking points is the save AM radio bill. Okay, they're not going to save AM radio. Eventually, the car manufacturers they can just stop putting radios in the cars, period, and just have internet connectivity for entertainment, and that's coming.
Whatever
So
happened?
one of the things, go ahead.
I was just going to say, whatever happened to HD AM radio? Because I remember that was a push for a while of getting high definition AM
It works. It's on there.
radio. Yeah.
You should get as a guest David McKenzie sometime. He'll explain all of that technical stuff to you about AM. It works. I mean, then it's being broadcast, but I mean, listen, the Europeans, they're shutting even the terrestrial FMs down because they move on to other, digital radio is all over Europe. Even that's being shut down, okay? Because IP distributed media is available on any cell phone tower in every industrialized country. I'm not sure eventually we're going to need, it's expensive to run an AM radio station. Electricity and old equipment that is technologically obsolete, and it has a 50 to 500 hertz frequency response. Why are we keeping any of the AM radio stations on the air?
Well, supposedly it's good enough for talk, but it's still it's a kludge. It definitely is a kludge. And the fact that the government's stepping in now and mandating that we have AM radios in our cars, I think people should be allowed to make their own choices. And one of the choices that people have made is that HD radio. You brought it up on HD AM. Well, HD FM is in the same boat. It's kind of like a nonsense that didn't quite make it.
They
thing.
botched the implementation of it.
Yeah.
And the broadcasters, the National Association of Broadcasters, are part of the botching of it because they had too many competing interests that were all, they couldn't agree on a common standard of implementing it. And as a result, the consumers don't understand that there's different HD programming choices on different radio stations. They don't understand how that works. And I mean, a good example is I got a new car. It's not a new car, but it's a 2017 BMW. And I had it for 6 months before my friend David, because I said to him, I don't have HD radio in this and I don't understand why. Well, because the car was shipped with the HD turned off. You had to go 5 menus down to turn the HD radio on. And here's the problem. My HD radio in my BMW works completely different than the rental car. When I flew to Chicago, it had an HD radio, but it tuned all the radio stations, including the AM HDs, all as one set of radio stations. But that's not how my radio in my BMW works. And there's like 9 different implementations among radio manufacturers. So people are confused. They don't know how to find any of that stuff.
Yeah, and the net result is that HD radio hasn't been a success. It's sort of like quad. It was a huge success way back when. Well, people don't care about 4 channels of audio, and I think a lot's going to happen with.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that later. That might be my age speaking, Alexander, about Atomos.
Alexander's going quad. What are you talking about? Quad.
I wasn't around when quad was a thing, but I know what it is.
It was the 5.1 of its day.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. They'd have 2 radio stations broadcasting near each other, and you put your left set of speakers, the 2 speakers, on WYSP in Philadelphia, and the second into WMMR, and then you would listen, you'd hear the surround effect. And unfortunately, there wasn't much content out. Anyhow,
Well,
it was just one of those experiments.
there was an FCC-approved quad broadcasting standard at one time, and I think it was implemented for like 3 months before people figured out it wasn't worth the trouble. And it was
it was like AM stereo. Does anybody even remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It's that people didn't care. It sounded AM for what it was sounded fine in mono. In fact, it sounded better. And the stereo thing was a kludge. Same thing with HD. It just hasn't quite caught on. And yeah, they've bodged it in terms of how they've rolled it out. And a lot of radio stations, unfortunately, throw the weirdest programming on their ancillary HD channels. They either rebroadcast their primary station, which I think it's the HD1, is the digital version of the analog version that's going out. And then they've got 2, 3, and 4, depending upon how much they want to squeeze that bandwidth out, because there's only so much bandwidth that you have. So they might be doing their sister station. They might be playing, all night polka music, or whatever. Not that I have anything against polka, but it's just strange. It's not going to offer the same variety and specificity that going to Pandora or Spotify can do. So radio has been trying to play catch up to technology for so long that it's missing the boat, and it's making mistakes that make it even that much more susceptible to being obsolete in terms of a format. So, that's one of the things that we want to explore.
Well, but
here
they're
on
dropping
the
the ball on some of the existing strengths that they had. And I'll give you an example. There were a lot of news stories. There was a flash snowstorm south of Washington, D.C. last winter, not this winter, last winter. And thousands of people were stuck on I-95 for 24 hours because it wasn't forecast. And most of the radio stations along the route, who are controlled by Clear Channel and the other large owners, never broke programming because it was all pre-programmed, because there was no human beings at the radio station to deliver the emergency notifications to people about where they could get help. They were stranded in their cars. Broadcasting used to step up to that and serve the community when there was a tornado or a weather emergency. And that was an example of where the broadcaster ownership is gone, where they have no provisions to act as an emergency conduit of information, which is the one last thing that they could do with these universally market-driven signals that cover large areas for free with universal availability of receivers. And they've screwed up on that.
Dave in the chat.
And the other
Dave in the chat was just pointing out that that AM or HD AM radio has really bad marking. He said it actually doesn't stand for high definition. It stands for hybrid digital. So that doesn't help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's what works on radio, and they should catch on, and maybe they will. Hyper local. It needs to go back to the mom pa days where they had personalities and things, because that's the only thing they can do to compete, is to have personalities and be very, very locally oriented, not nationally oriented. Here's the thing: if I'm getting very technical, I promise to give you a couple of insights and behind the scenes the way the industry works now. I would say that 99.9% of all broadcast radio stations are run by a computer. It's automated. There may be somebody there, but it's all been run through a computer and homogenized and programmed in advance. And to Steve's point, if something happens instantly that requires immediate response, they're really not equipped to be able to deal with that. A local station that was one of the news stations in town, we had a hurricane come through the area, and the local station was still broadcasting the regular forecast. They didn't even acknowledge that there was a hurricane and emergency services were needed.
I did a shift at a college radio station when I was going through broadcast school, and like you were saying about the point about everything being automated, it was mostly automated, and our computer crashed in the middle live while I'm doing the show. And I'm like, I can't do anything. I had to call the IT person. I had no way of getting it working again. It was just dead air. I just had to talk. So
yeah, and the question is, does that make better radio? Having it run through a computer.
Yeah, only if you know how to vamp and you know how to improvise. Yeah, it could be if you're good at it. But if you're new and you're just going through school and you're just trying to figure things out, you're having to deal with nerves a lot, and it's a problem.
Yeah, listen, I don't think that, I mean, look, there's some forces that radio ownership and people can't do anything about. The drop in revenue because of internet advertising taking a lot of dollars that used to flow to the targeting medium of choice, radio. Can't do anything about that. But it really, when I first was in 13 years old in junior high and had a TV class, I had a teacher that had a presentation to us about broadcasting was all about the public interest, convenience, and necessity. I swear, he really introduced all of us young broadcasters who were interested in TV and radio to that concept, which supposedly was driving the federal regulations about who got radio stations, what was on them, how radio stations ascertain their communities. Now, a lot of it, we have to admit, was bullshit. It was all about making money even back then. But the reality is, I think that public interest, convenience, and necessity thing No, the big money that the corporate faceless ownership, they're publicly held. They're not interested in that. They're interested in the results for the quarter. And it wasn't
Right.
so much that way. Yes, the companies I worked for, like Capital Broadcast, we owned 6 AMs and 6 FMs, or 7 AMs and 7 FMs around the country. Yeah, we were interested in our communities because we super served those communities that we owned our radio stations in. I don't think the owners of Clear Channel could even by memory tell you the markets that they own in. Forget about the radio stations.
Yeah, Mitch. By the way, we lost. I don't know when you wanted to bring on our next guest, Mike, but he dropped out of the Zoom call, so I don't know if you want to.
He's watching. He'll be back
Okay.
on it. He just texted me.
Yeah, I just sent him a note if he wants to come in.
anyways,
And again, one of the things we're gonna do what we call keeping it real. We're not going to act like there's no chance of any mistakes. If there's a colossal failure, technically or otherwise, or pronunciation wise, we're gonna own up to it, and that's going to be the way we're going to do everything. We're going to allow you to see a little bit under the covers what goes on when you try to do a podcast. And we're new to this. I mean, I'm frankly, I've never done a podcast before. This is my first time. I did used to be on a program called Office Hours, which I think Alexander is still on, which is a good tech program if you want to ask questions. But this is a totally different beast. So this target and what we talk about and how we talk about it is going to be moving constantly in different directions until we find our. This is our first one. So we don't exactly know what we want to do and make it interesting. You might ask, well, why is Steve here? I mean, he's not a big radio DJ from the past. Well, he is a well-read, very understanding guy of the world and the technology that exists out there. So you're getting some insight into the background of the way things were. I used to be a radio DJ, so I could tell you what it used to be like. Little things like, how you used to. Well, see, again, I'm talking to older people now. So
And
now
Mitch,
to
just
the
for the
older
listeners,
crowd.
could you actually tell people what that famous radio station was that you worked at?
Back when I started at the same station that I think Steve got into professionally. It's called WAMS Radio, locally here in Wilmington, Delaware. And I sort of cut my teeth there onto what broadcasting was. But the way broadcasting works is you try to get as much as you can out of that particular station, and then you start sending examples of your work to radio stations all over the country, usually bigger radio stations. And we all kind of aspired to work at the big major market stations like in Philadelphia or New York or Chicago or L.A. And so I left WAMS to go to San Antonio, Texas, to a station called KONO. And I was a young guy of 17 doing afternoon drive there. Pretty good job, no money, but I would have paid them to do it. And then always wanting to get back to Philadelphia, I came back to a radio station in Philly called WPEN, which wouldn't tell me what they were going to play, but they were changing their format to oldies. And it turned out that it was all this doo-woppy stuff from the 50s and early 60s. And me being a 17-year-old top 40 DJ, I was like, I can't stand this stuff. And I lasted about 3 months there. Then I went back to WAMS for a while. And then I got noticed by Jay Cook in Philadelphia. Jay is a famous programmer that worked WFIL in Philadelphia, which was one of the top radio stations in the country in terms of its sound, its presentation, its ability to overtake the legendary WIBG and other stations in the Philadelphia market. And I got my big chance. So I was working the big time at a young age of about, at that time I was 18 or 19. And I was doing nights, 6 to 10 at night. And I'd replaced a guy named George Michaels and Banana Joe Monteon. And
George
it was a
Michael
great
went
job.
on to fame as the George Michael Sports Machine on network television
In Baltimore, and he's syndicated. George was great. He was a hell of a talent. And, and I did that for about 3 years, and then they changed their format. And when that happened, I realized I worked all of my career to get to this big radio station in Philadelphia. I mean, it was my dream come true. And I kind of tossed out the opportunities that I had there because I just didn't know any better. I was too young. And I got canned because they were changing their format to more adult contemporary. So I kind of had an epiphany at that point that said, wow, I mean, you work your whole career to get to this place. Where else can you go from there? Maybe somewhere in Chicago or New York or L.A., maybe not. And there's no equity. I have nothing to to borrow upon. So I got out of the business for a time, and then I came back quickly 15 years later here in Wilmington at the local top 40 station WSTW, and they asked me if I would do mornings. So I did that for about another 3 years, and then I left that. So that's my entire radio career up until this point. What was interesting about it, there's nothing more fun than doing something and doing it well, and the energy you get from doing a live program. It's just something about that that really just energizes you. And you have people listening to care about you, and you talk to them every day. The irony of I've asked this many times to big programmers, what is it that a radio person should do when they do a program? I don't care if they're playing country or top 40 or doing a talk show. What do people want to hear? And ultimately, what they really want to hear is that everything's okay. They want to get up in the morning and hear that familiar voice and know that everything's okay. It's okay out there. And if you could do that and entertain them and have fun with them, that was an important thing. But that only lasts so long, and then eventually you get tired of doing it, and then you can't find more protein to continue to make it. I think you have to be challenged to be different. So this is a challenge to me. I hope it is to you guys, and I hope it is to you as listeners, that doing a podcast and keeping it relevant. No, we don't have gigantic guests coming on, but we might. We might get to that point. Am I pleading with you to smash the like button? No, I think that's pretty lame. Don't forget what you got to do. You got to say subscribe and hit the like button, and I forget about it. I'm not gonna put you through.
Well, you can do that because that will help the audience.
Yeah. So I'll let Steve make the case.
No, go ahead. Push that thumbs up and subscribe. This is Mitch, I really admire what you're doing because this is kind of the beta podcast, an experimental thing, but I'm a big fan of Rick Beato. I don't know if you ever watched his podcast.
Yeah,
but
he's great.
You're familiar with Rick. And Rick started like this, about playing the guitar and music theory and recording studio technical stuff, but now he's got Sting and he had Michael McDonald on this week, and he has millions of subscribers to the Rick Beato music, and it's on 3 or 4 times a week, and it's fabulous content. And I could see you developing something like that about the radio and broadcasting business. Absolutely.
Yeah, but not just that. I mean, other things that relate to it, that tangentially approach broadcasting. It's like, where do you get exposed to new music? Where do you get your information from? How do you like it? We're reaching a point in time where it's the Wild West out there for getting information from the internet. I think that one of the big things that's going to be affecting us is, can you believe everything that's being said? Are the stories true? Are they being deep faked?
A lot of them are not true because AI is generated and there's no content checking. And some of the stuff generated by AI is just plain wrong. I've watched news-driven video things here on YouTube that were done by AI, and they are there just to snag viewership. And they're generated by AI you know about this more than I do, about the AI. You can now have announcing on AI where the voice is generated. And
yeah, I can spot that now. Maybe someday will come when I can't notice that. But it's a scam. The whole internet thing is a giant scam because it's all about clickbait and getting you to smash that subscribe button or like button. By the way, we've got 9 subscribers now. Thank you very much. You're the first 9 out of many, many people to do it. And guess what? If this doesn't work, we're not going to do it anymore. But as long as there's an audience,
Mitch, are you giving Black Sabbath T-shirts away or something?
So swag, we need swag. Call in. I used to do the don't say hello, say WFIL is going to make me rich, and we'll give you $10,000. We could do contests. All of those people that you mentioned, and some of them are mysteries to me. They had to generate listeners and subscribers one at a time. And that's not easy to do. It may take years to get to a point.
A lot of these podcasts, you're right. They start with 1 viewer, and some of them have 10 million people that view. I mean, I listen to the Bulwark, which is a big network of podcasts, and Midas Touch Media, which is legal analysis of important legal things that are coming up. They have like 4 million subscribers. Yeah.
Yeah, and it will go where it goes. That's strict. And if along the way we just hit on some magic formula that seems to be synthesizing a reaction from people, then we'll. Did I just say that? Does that sound official? Anyhow, it sounds a little haughty-taughty. If we do something people like, then we'll continue to do it. And part of doing that is for folks that are watching to kind of help guide us into what works and what doesn't. Because one of the things we can do on a YouTube stream is we can look back at it and we can see the metadata. I mean, I'll let Alexander explain how that works, but you can literally see where people were listening and were involved, and then where they didn't like it. So if we only had that in radio, where we had like a big graph in front of us when we used to be on a top 40 radio station, and I'm like really, I've got listeners, I've got like 1 million people listening in the Philadelphia market, and then I play Terry Jackson's Seasons in the Sun, and all of a sudden,
yeah.
Hey, that's Canadian content right there.
And let me just address the audience quickly, too. We have an email address now, too. So if you have any feedback, if you have any questions, anyone that you want to see on the show as a guest that we can talk to, you can send us an email to hello@thelastangrydj.com. Mitch, I actually have a question for you. Where do you think all of the big voices in radio have gone, and why aren't we hearing a lot of that now? And I don't mean figuratively, I mean literally the people that are talented and work on their craft and work on their voice, because it is a muscle like anything else that needs to be exercised. Obviously, when the moment you open your mouth, I can tell that you've worked in broadcast, that you know how to work a mic. So you know how to use your tool, which is your voice.
Really?
And I don't really hear a lot of that now. When I went to radio school, people were encouraged to not do the quote-unquote typical radio voice, to not put that on, to just speak like you normally would speak. But the problem is a lot of
yucking it up.
But people don't work on their voice anymore. So I'm not sure why we're telling people in school or spending all this money to not work on their voice, because that to me is a thing that you do need to work on constantly. You need to, I go back and listen to myself. I listen to old podcasts. I'll listen to recordings to try to figure out, well, what bad habits am I developing? What do I need to not do anymore? Right, I need to purge.
You need
all
to
those,
get a haircut,
I need to,
Alexander.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. Yeah, I've never heard that before. Nobody on the internet has ever said anything about.
I'm just
my
taking
hair
a cheap
before.
shot because it's like he's like waiting for me to do it.
Hey,
so
nobody
I'm getting that
in
out
radio.
of the way.
In radio, nobody knows about your hair.
Yeah, look at my hair. I'm just jealous. I got to kind of unpack what you were talking about. The big voiced radio people that we grew up listening to, most of them are dead. That's the irony of it, is that I was very young, and I think Steve was very young too.
Robert W. Morgan, Casey.
Yeah, all those guys. Charlie Van Dyke, Don Imus, all those guys. They're no longer with us because we were young guys when we got into the business, and now I'm an old guy and I'm still around. But there's not many older guys that were in the radio business in the 70s and in the 80s. As far as the voice thing goes, your voice is an instrument, and if you use it, it becomes better and better with age. And in the old radio days, we're talking about the 70s and the 80s, maybe even the 90s, we had to talk with that big radio voice, not necessarily the yucky duck DJs that talk like this. Hey, everybody, let's scatter the wax and splatter the platters. I don't think any radio DJ ever sounded like that. I think they just did that as a anachronism for what they should sound like, or what people think they sound like. But anyhow, the idea was that you always talked from above as a radio announcer back then. That's not the style anymore. The style today is to be natural and normal. I try to sound that way, but I'm still stuck with a radio voice. So when I get in front of a bunch of people and start talking to them, I start pushing the radio voice. The only advantage that it...
Why do you think people in the 40s, in the early days of radio, had that overhyped voice? Why did everyone on the radio back then sound like this? Was it just to get people's attention, or is that is that exaggerated?
Walter Winchell and Paul Harvey. Do you
Yeah,
know
part
who
of
those
that
people
was
are?
that was called the Middle Atlantic accent. that actually was taught to people in schools in New England, and a lot of people have that. Katharine Hepburn, for example, has that it's almost a British accent, but it's Middle Atlantic, and a lot of radio people being in New York. In those days, all the broadcast lines went to New York, and all the networks came out of New York. So some of those early announcers had that Middle Atlantic weird accent. Yeah.
So I'm going to take shot 2 at Alexander, because that's why he's here to help. He can take shots at me, but the across the border up into Canada, when you say a boot and a and things like that, I mean, that's things we pick on. So when exactly, I don't think I've ever heard you say.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't say
absolutely. It's like what do you? That's how what do you guys? You just make maple syrup and play with hockey sticks in your spare. Yeah. See, and I open the door and say, "Hey, look, take your shot." But what Steve's talking about, there really was no specific radio voice. I mean, there was a thing called the broadcast belt, where there were neutral accents, and that kind of went from Western Pennsylvania through Ohio into the Midwest. I don't think many people were talking like they had clam chowder for lunch. Are they from New York? How are you? Nice to talk to you. Something's wrong here. We didn't talk that way. And when I went to Texas, it was funny because I thought I had a neutral radio accent, and my compatriots in San Antonio would say, "Oh, you sound like you're right out of New York City." And I'm like, "What?" And they'd say, "We sound perfect. We talk just like the people around here. How you doing?" I said, "You sound like you just came off a horse in the middle of the horse with no name."
Mitch,
it's like everybody.
When you want to get a reservation at a restaurant, do you leverage your celebrity? Do you go, "Hello, I'm Mitchel K.C. Hill, former shock jock"?
Well, in his day when he was doing mornings on WSTW, which was the big wheel radio station in Wilmington, yeah, he was famous man about town, and he could get into any restaurant he wanted to in those days.
Was that the job? Actually, the way I got into restaurants was much simpler. I would just turn to my right and look at the poster on the wall.
Exactly.
Where I was picked the best DJ, and I'd go into like the big Mexican restaurant. And they go, "Oh, look at you, whatever," and they would say, "Oh, look,
free margarita for you."
Look at that sweater.
There's
can we see that sweater again? Oh my God, look at that.
That's me.
He was pretty famous, like I said, in the day. But Alexander, I'll address that a little bit. How did we? I mean, I was not a big on-air personality or anything, but all of us who were interested in broadcasting and radio, we usually started at some little radio station. Like my friend Mike, he at WMPH was our high school radio station. Mitch put the high school radio station on the high school where he's an alumnus of in Hockessin, Delaware. And then we would sometimes go from that to the local 250 watt daytimer. I think it was, were they 1,000 watts, 500? But anyway, WNRK. And like I worked for a while as an intern at WILM. And these are, Wilmington was not a tiny market, but I worked at Arbitron with a lot of guys that had started in the radio business, and they worked in little tiny Yankton, South Dakota, and at a little tiny, the 4th rated radio station. And if you really wanted to progress your career, you would move up, but the stakes were lower in those low non-rated markets. And then you get another job and you would improve. And then you have a program director that would kind of coach you on your delivery and how you presented a radio show. Well, that doesn't exist anymore, I don't think, because there aren't any local radio stations where a 16-year-old can go spin records on Saturday night and maybe make $2 an hour like we used to do. So there was a farm team, and if our voice was a little off and we hadn't changed, we would be coached maybe to talk more like a broadcaster. So I think that's where some of that delivery of Robert W. Morgan or Larry Lujak or any number of what you say voices came from.
Don LaFontaine in a
there
world.
We go, Don. In a world where people are watching this movie.
Keep trying, Steve. Keep trying. And to also answer your question, have I ever used it to get? Here's the thing: when you have the voice, you can employ. I call it the voice. And if I'm in a podcast with a bunch of people and I need to be heard in a big group of people, I can get attention because first of all, I've got the voice, and then I have great audio and video that helps me to make that happen. So yes, I have used that before in order to influence and get reservations or to get attention in a room, in a meeting to be able to do it. But at the same time, it works against you because I could get excited about something. I could be with a bunch of buddies at the local watering hole, like Kid Shalene's locally here. And before I know it, I'm the loudest guy in the group, and I'm sounding like a radio guy, and everybody starts looking at you strangely. So that's where it starts working against you because you're affected. I've been affected by my career choice and the fact that I've cultivated this voice. I actually work trying not to sound like that. I do voiceover work on the side with a thing called Voice Jungle, and it doesn't pay very well, but it's like regular work. And I end up getting all the car dealership spots all over the country. I'm doing spots for Mac Hike and This Week Only, all that kind of stuff. And if they only knew there's some poor 69-year-old guy straining his voice in order to shout 50 seconds of copy in 30 seconds and motivate people, Cal Worthington style, that was what I did. But that's my stock in trade. And I can't leverage that so much anymore unless I'm doing oldies. And the other problem is that today's oldies radio station, you'd think oldies, well, that's the 50s and 60s. It's not. Oldies are the 80s now. So when you're talking about oldies, you're playing Duran Duran and Art of Noise and the stuff, the big hair super power
think
ballads.
About it, the equivalent of if it was 1970. Music, 40-year-old music was from the 1930s, like when right after the introduction of the, record, phonograph record. It's that's how far away we are from the 80s today.
And there really hasn't been a sea change as big as the Beatles, to be honest. Maybe people will argue with me about it, but the Beatles were the last giant sea change in music in the British invasion. There are different styles of music that have sort of morphed into what they are today, whether it's hip hop.
Well, don't say that. The emergence of rap has really affected radio. There wasn't the last major thing to happen to music was 1964, the British invasion.
Yeah, it was.
And other
It truly
stuff
was.
since 1964.
There you go. I mean, Weird Al Yankovic, what was it?
You're showing your age, Mitch. You should be angry.
I know. Hey, look, I embrace my age. And talk about age. Let's talk a little bit about ageism.
Okay.
And you as a legal associate, maybe you can render an opinion on this. It gets in the way of things. When I tell somebody, I have another business where I do TV and radio commercials, and when I talk to people about try to get work, and they say, well, what are your qualifications? I got 40 years in shooting commercials and editing them and voicing them. People kind of scratch their head. 40 years, huh? It's a negative. It's literally a negative. Being older and experienced in today's world.
It's the last acceptable bigotry. I mean, maybe that's a strong word, but you can't exclude people from consideration on race, gender identity, sexuality, political viewpoint, religion, but you can even say it out loud. We're not going to hire that guy. He's too old. What's going on in politics? Joe Biden, we can't have him as president. He's too old.
I don't think we should underplay that at all. I think that's a very real thing that is a concern. I hear it in the companies that I've worked for when they look at hiring older people. I know it's a concern. Actually, a good friend of mine that I used to work with who had a stroke 2 years ago, and he's still recovering from it. He's not going to be able to come back and do the job because he can't, due to complications from that. And one of very candid conversations the two of us had, he said, look, I'm already 2 years into this recovery. I think he's 60 now. He said, by the time I'm possibly may be able or capable to come back to work, I'm not going to be able to do that job. I'm not going to be able to lift all the things that I was lifting before because it was a very physically demanding job. And one of his concerns was, who's going to hire me? What am I going to do? Who's going to retrain me? It's a very real concern for a lot of people.
And people are living longer. many of us, okay, there are people, I have friends, I had a really good friend from the radio business. He worked for Cox Broadcasting. He was very successful. He was on the air with me at radio stations long ago in Florida, but then he became a very prominent sales manager and radio station manager. And he retired at like 62 because he wanted to. But a lot of people I'm in my 60s and I don't want to stop working. I have no desire to go and fish or play golf or whatever people do or retired. I have a lot of contributions to make in my field, and I want to continue making those. I realize as we get older, sometimes our physical abilities do change and things, but Americans live longer and can work longer and want to. And if people want to be in the workforce, they shouldn't be excluded because somebody says, "Oh, they're too old." That's called a prejudice.
100%.
That has often nothing to do with the bona fide occupational qualifications. Now, granted, we have to always make room for young people that come into whatever professions we're in. We have to realize that we're moving along. I have another profession. I also fly jets, and I'm too old to fly commercial airliners. I can't work for an airline because there's a legal reason I can't. But unless there's a legal reason, a lot of people want to work past 65 years old.
And I don't think there's any reason why you shouldn't be able why you shouldn't be able to. I mean, I think as long as
a lot of young people are really harsh on people that are 30 years older than them.
See,
they don't want to.
I don't like that. I experience this. I always call people out when they do that. It really annoys me. And when I was growing up, a lot of my friends were quite a bit older than me because I always looked up to people like that. I actually aspired to be older because I always felt that there was a lot to respect in someone who's older because they're more mature, they have a lot more life experience, and I always admired people like that. But a lot of people don't. I realize that there's a lot of people, younger people, that don't look at older people in that way, and maybe partly it's cultural too. I feel that in maybe certain cultures they respect their elders a little bit more than we do. We certainly don't seem to all that much. I see it every day. And I don't know how do you change that on a grand scale. I don't know how you change that. But I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show and why I'm really excited to be here and talk to Mitch and talk to a lot of people is I think it's going to be great to see both perspectives of people who have worked in the industry for a long time and people that are just coming up now, and seeing where things meet sort of somewhat in the middle, and see what people are dealing with now. What kind of challenges do young people have now in the broadcast industry? Because a lot has changed. Mitch, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say that what you did, and that is that you're here for a reason, and that is to provide a different perspective. And the whole concept of this program originally was the idea that I'm on a certain tangent because of my age and because of my background, and you're on a completely different tangent because of your age and your background and your cultural upbringing. That somehow we're contrasting and correcting to see if we can come through this, because we're living in a world, folks, where people can't have a conversation anymore without becoming instantly polarized by something. And I don't want to get into those things specifically what it is, but it is hard to have a straight up conversation. And it's very refreshing to hear what Alexander was just saying, that he feels that we deserve a shot if we're a bit older. And I feel that younger people deserve a shot too because they're younger. All I want to be is considered based on my merits and my abilities, not because of my age. And that I've been,
yeah, you have to realize that we have to have a kind of a younger outlook. If you're going to work with younger people, you can't always say, well, in our day, we used to do this, and I can't believe we do it this way now. You have to be open to the changes in the way the media is reconfigured and maybe the different skill sets. Absolutely. That you might have to go and retrain yourself for something in a different skill area, because we're not like in broadcasting. You used to have to know how to like put the carts in the cart machine and cue the tapes and stuff. Well, there's a whole, if you're doing terrestrial radio, there's a whole different set of skills that you got to learn to voice track a radio show, for example. I don't have those.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Stephen, because that's another thing too that I feel, for me, my personality, I've always tried to stay up with what's going on because technology now more so than ever is changing so rapidly. I mean, just look what's going on in the industry with large language models and artificial intelligence, and we'll use AI as a blanket term to group all that stuff together. So this stuff is changing, and I think that if we want to evolve, we should be constantly seeking out knowledge and keeping up with what's going on, because I think it's an excuse when I hear somebody, especially if they're older, to say that, well, it's too late for me, or I can't really learn new things. That's a cop-out. That's BS.
That is. You're right. Absolutely.
If you have the willingness to learn, you can do it. You can stay just as relevant. You can contribute just as much as anybody half your age now, if you're willing to do it. And actually, just in the chat here, someone named Standing Room Inc. said, as an older editor myself, I over finesse because that's what I love to see. And I hire kids to edit social media for me because social media doesn't want finesse. I think that's a very valid point. We see that all the time now with, as someone who creates content for, bite-sized, very short content for Instagram and TikTok and all these platforms where you're vying for people's very low attention spans. We're talking 60 seconds, 90 seconds to capture an idea and to also provide context. And a lot of these platforms, I put so much production work into these clips, and I find that the ones that are the most successful are the ones that don't really have a lot of production.
Yeah, they're more spontaneous. They're shot on your iPhone in 15 seconds.
They don't their frame doesn't look like mine. They're not talking into an expensive microphone. They don't have all these lights. They're just, the video quality, the audio quality might not be there, but maybe they had something to say, and for whatever reason it resonates. And of course, sometimes there's lots of silly content, and I have no understanding of why that stuff ever becomes popular. Why does somebody standing in front of a mirror dancing become popular? Why does that person get 2 million views on their video? And I try to say something insightful, and almost nobody watches it. Right?
Why is a 6-year-old who's unboxing a toy monetizing $12 million a year on YouTube videos? I don't get it.
I don't know.
That's a mystery.
I mean, by the way, we would love to monetize, but we're not going to charge for this this conversation. We thank everybody.
Well, we have to pay people to listen to it, Mitch.
Exactly. We're kind of at that point. I want to say, put a shout out again to the guy at Standing Room. That's Chris Alberts. Chris was my producer at my morning show at WSDW, and he brought so much contrast and content to the program. I'm talent, and you need a producer outside of that talent bubble that guides you in the right direction. Sort of like Artie on the Larry Sanders Show. That's what Chris used to do for me, so I wanted to say hi to him. And by the way, a little tidbit, Chris's dad was Al Alberts. If you know the Philadelphia market, you know that Al Alberts had a variety show on Channel 6. So he's the son of royalty when it comes to producing. Chris lives down in Florida.
Did he have Larry Ferrari on as a guest frequently?
You know what? We almost had Larry on, but Larry passed away. But we did have his dad on doing commercials with us. So, on the way to Cape May was one of the specialty items. Once in a while, we'll talk about some of that old stuff. I know it's boring as hell for some of you younger folks too, but some of the middle to older folks are going to say, oh, he was around then, and what was that like? We want to sort of pull the curtains away or open the kimono a little bit about the way the broadcasting industry works, so that there's some little understanding about that. We got some nice comments coming in for Steve being here, because they say you're very insightful.
Oh, I doubt that.
Well, I think you are. I think you happen to know a lot about the politics, the legalese, and the history of the broadcasting industry by being somebody that did all those jobs. You were on the air, you were a salesperson, you were management, and nowadays you're in other things that are related to it. So I
I
Tip
dreamed
of the
of
hat.
having a career in the broadcasting business, and I had an interesting career, but I've gone on to do many other things since then. But I've always interested, most of my close friends are the circle that you're in, and they're still, had their entire careers in broadcasting, and I stayed in contact with what's going on in the broadcasting business because I do think it's an important service and part of American culture, and it's a shame that it's going away. Um, it in many ways.
So we agree that it's going away, that its days are numbered.
Well, I think, look, I'll tell you just a brief story about the way broadcasting has changed. I was in a Uber in Chicago, being taken back to the to Midway Airport, where I was picking up some money flying this jet, and we were going to fly home to Tampa here. And I started talking to the guy. He was a Hispanic gentleman, and very interested. And he said, "Oh," I said, "Is this your only gig?" And he says, "Oh no, I also have a radio show." Turns out he has like one of the top rated radio shows on a Hispanic FM in Chicago. But here's the deal: he pays the radio station for the time in the afternoon. It's regional Mexican music. That's where he's from, Central Mexico. And he drives Uber, and then in the afternoon, he goes and collects money from his advertisers, including one of his big advertiser is a dry cleaner on Cicero Boulevard in the heart of a growing Hispanic community in Chicago, and a body shop that specializes in fixing cars of Hispanic customers. And he's got 20 customers that he does live commercials on this radio station. And he's making some serious money doing this and driving Uber.
So he's found something relative. Like I can't make money in the radio business like I used to. So I have to do other things. And it so happens I do TV commercials and radio.
Well,
and I think I've already said that.
You're an excellent corporate video production, you do a lot of, people will never see your stuff because it's at sales presentations for drugs and doctors, and you have other corporate clients over the years that you do this high-end video.
Thank you. And yet that business has changed. I mean, it's changed drastically to the point where it used to be there, we'll call it the gatekeeper concept. There used to always be somebody within a corporate, whether it's a bank or a pharmaceutical company or a major corporation like DuPont, for example, that sat there and made decisions about who they're going to use to do certain kinds of work based on their knowledge of that person's abilities. So you got work based on, I'm going to Mitch because he does this kind of a show open kind of thing. And those people have been replaced by people working in accounting departments, and it's all based on how much money they can save by going with whoever is doing the work. So the idea here now is that you're not being chosen based on your merits as your talent and your merits. You're being chosen based on how cheap are you and what kind of relationship, because you're a younger guy as opposed to an older guy. So I can't, it's not in my DNA to do a job that's anything but my very best work that I can do. I just can't dumb it down and cheap it up. And that's kind of limited me on the amount of work that I can get with some. There's still a few people out there that want that. They want.
Well, also there isn't as much money in it. I mean, most people, I have a friend who's a social media consultant. She does a lot of social media for smaller companies. And there just isn't a tremendous amount of money in doing it because there's so many people that have the ability to produce that content. Influence. Some influencers make a lot of money, but there are a lot of influencers that make less than $10,000 a year doing.
And there's a downturn in that, Steve. There's a downturn in influencers on, it was a raging business opportunity there for a while, and now the people that have done really well are saying
there's too many of them. As part of the problem is it's hard to get attention, but it always amazes me ones that I never heard of that are are influencers that make $10 million a year. And just
you mean Mr. Beast?
Well, Mr. Beast is one that he's not really an influencer. He produces jumping off of buildings and different very attractive action stuff for the internet. And I think he's got monetized revenue on YouTube north of $10 million a year or something like that, right?
Yeah, Mr.
Beast. Let's face it. This is broadcasting right now. Okay. It's even better than being on 1380 WAMS in 1977. Literally, people all over the world could be watching this right now, or not watching it. We can have an international audience that ignores it too.
Yeah, Mr. Beast has a big. I mean, it's a big organization now. He has a big team.
Explain what Mr. Beast is, because you probably know better than I do.
The thing is, I don't watch his channel. I'm just aware of his level of success. But I mean, when you get to the point where you have 50 people that are creating content for you and editing your content, that's a big production. That's a lot of people creating, and it does take, at the level that he is now, you do need a big team in order to sustain, like, to do what he's doing at that level now. He needs a big team, because it's not just about money. It's all the other ancillary.
Yeah, but explain what the content that that team produces so people understand.
I don't know if I can really explain Mr. Beast's content because I don't really watch it. So
okay,
yeah, but
fair enough.
But yeah,
he hands out a lot of money, and that gets people to watch him. That's what I got from it, anyhow. I don't watch him on a regular basis.
Well, it's part of this. It's part of the stratification of media and media time. I mean, a lot of the time that used to go to radio listening to me has gone to podcasts. I listen to maybe 2 hours a day of podcasts. That's TSL that is not available to radio stations.
Time
and it's
spent
also,
listening,
by the way, not available to some of my TV viewing. I'll turn the TV off now at 9 o'clock and, not even watch the 11 o'clock news in the local market. And I never used to do that.
So do you think we should do gags on this program? I used to do gags on when I used to do mornings at WSDW that people really responded to. But that was back in the 90s. So, maybe it's not relative. I used to do a show called, or a program segment called Alive or Dead. We would throw names out there and everybody would have to guess whether they were still alive or they were dead.
Do you think that as a program element? Sure, I think you can.
All right, let's do a test right now.
I like the idea of doing fake commercials, just like really humorous, silly parodies. I like that idea. Yeah.
All right. And I had another one that I did that I liked was people I most likely want to slap. For saying either doing or saying stupid things. That are
How
just
about
silly.
Alive or Dead? Mel Brooks. Alive or dead?
Fred Gwynn, Herman Munster, alive or dead?
No, he's dead. He's dead.
All right, he is dead. David Soul from Starsky and Hutch.
Oh, he died last year, I think.
All right. See, you're already going to be a game buster here. Ben Stein from Win Ben Stein's Money.
Still alive.
That's a hard one. I'm not sure. Is he alive?
Pretty sure he's alive. Pretty sure he's alive.
See, this is like Schrodinger's cat. He could be alive and dead all at the same time until we decide. He's alive. He's alive.
Yeah, it's also a little bit of a cheat because you can always Google the name real quick and find out.
See, I see you going over to your Google support there. Cal Worthington, alive or dead?
Oh no, he died. He's dead.
See, all right.
I don't have to look that up.
I don't want to get into the.
I read his obit in the New York Times. Yeah.
People I most likely want to slap. I think that would be dangerous. Another one I would like to do is remember bumper stickers were the thing. How about if you see a bumper sticker? Here's one that I saw the other day that I thought was hilarious. This is the bumper sticker.
Already.
What's that?
Yeah, just ended already.
Yeah, exactly. It says giant meteor just ended already. That's in anticipation of the coming election. So
right.
We could do little fun things like that or not. I mean, that's where people have to comment and say, no, we don't need that. Or we like the idea of a parody commercial. That's a lot of work, by the way, because we're literally doing it for nothing. I'd like to do a parody of the people that want you to, like every single time that I want to find something on the on YouTube or the internet, that I have to go through like 30 seconds to a minute of them pleading for you. Make sure you smash the like button or the subscribe button. I mean, that to me just irritates the crap out of me. I think that's you're just begging a little too hard for that.
Yeah. What about
Wu-Tang Clan? Of course. I like that.
I'm walking down the street and our HOA political signage is banned. So when I was walking down the street, I thought this was for one of the presidential candidates, and I'm walking down the street, and then it's obviously for the Wu-Tang Clan. So
the problem with that is that most older people have absolutely no idea who they are.
Well, even younger people don't know who Wu-Tang is. That you have to be about 30 to know who the Wu, because if you're only
Alexander, you know who Wu-Tang Clan is, the group?
Yes, I know who they are.
You don't like RZA?
I don't know their
in a
music.
couple of movies.
I wasn't really listening to hip hop back then. I was listening to rock and heavy metal back then.
All right, cool.
That's what I was listening to. But hey, what about radio plays? Because I've been dying to do a radio drama. I know it's a lot of work, but I think we can find a script that's in the public domain that we could get some.
Well, there are YouTube channels where they do radio dramas or have the old tapes of radio dramas.
Well, what's interesting, that was how radio got its start, because they didn't have TV back then, so they had to, the family would gather around the receiver, the giant radio, and they would listen to, The Shadow and other shows like that.
Soap operas.
It was a big deal. And the thing about it is because it wasn't involving CGI and trillions of dollars of production, it was playing the
theater of the mind.
Theater of the mind. The theater of the mind. And
don't you remember CBS Mystery Theater when they used to try to force us to listen to new radio mysteries in the 70s?
You know who was great back and you have to look them up because, again, it's an old reference. Firesign Theater did the funniest radio plays you could possibly imagine. They were like the Second City of radio plays back in the day. You know who I'm talking about?
We played them on WMPH when I was
okay, cool.
Yeah,
that makes it relevant. So yeah, I'm just being sarcastic.
This is what I've been dying to do: The Shadow.
The original Shadow?
Yeah, I would love to do a Shadow radio play.
Yeah, but you wouldn't do it on radio. You would just do it as a podcast. There are a bunch of those podcasts now that are mysteries, or true crime. That's a huge podcast genre that people listen to. Millions of people listen.
What's up with the Shadow's nose, by the way? Did he always have a gigantic nose?
That is something I've always thought. I've never
me.
Understood that either. I've never understood that. And if you watch...
Even when Alec Baldwin did the movie, he had a gigantic nose. I'm like, what's the point of that?
When he, in the live action movie with Alec Baldwin, when he would use his psychic powers to transform into the Shadow, because perceptually people would see him differently. So to disguise his face, his face would change. And it's funny because his nose grows in the movie. I don't understand it. I really don't understand it.
I don't either. It's just crazy stuff. So, calling out that kind of stuff that's in the media is fun. What are you guys watching on TV these days?
Well, I'm watching, like I said earlier, I'm watching, Tokyo Vice, the second season.
Excellent show.
I haven't started it. Don't spoil it for me.
On HBO Max.
Yes, and then I'm also watching Shogun, which is a remake of a 1970s miniseries with Richard Chamberlain, based on a very popular book in the 1970s by Clavel, which was like a doorstop. It was
James Clavel, the
Clavel
pundit.
book. Yeah, the book was about 9 inches thick. I've never read it, but now after watching Shogun, I might go out and pick a copy of it up on eBay and read it. Yeah.
What do you guys think of Apple doing these movies and funding them? Obviously, don't lack for money, and they're throwing huge sums of money. It's like the deal is
less though.
They threw $1 billion at last year's movies that they produced. It's like, can money win that battle?
There's a shakeout going on right now in streaming.
Well,
there's going to be a lot of streaming people.
I think what they're going to find is, yes, you're right. Their pockets, Apple's pockets are very deep. And that may be working for now, and that may continue to work for the foreseeable future as they try to get more eyeballs on their brand new streaming service, because they haven't been doing it for very long. So they need to be able to spend the money to get the content on there. Otherwise, there's just no reason for people to go there. As good as a lot of the original content is, they don't have the back catalog. They haven't acquired the rights to all of the popular TV shows that people like to see. So people are going to Apple. They could.
They could buy anything.
Well, yeah, but a lot of those rights
They've got $400 billion in the bank right now.
There's exclusivity rights, and certain platforms have rights for a certain number of years. You have to wait for those rights to expire and for those deals to die. But I think at some point it's not going to be sustainable, because even Apple, as rich as they are, I don't think any company enjoys frivolously burning through cash. I think they do it because it's a necessity. I think they do it because they can and they have to right now. 10 years from now, I think that's going to slow down quite a bit.
All right. Tonight is the Oscars in a half an hour, as a matter of fact.
Academy Awards. It's on earlier this year. They're smart. They moved it up an hour.
They got to do, because all of us older guys have to fall asleep.
Why does anybody
be
care?
very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how Apple does in the Academy
well,
Awards this year.
Alexander, you hit on something. Why does anybody care? Because the audiences for those kind of shows is diminished by 50% over the last maybe 10 years. The SAG Awards were not even broadcast on any television network. They were only on Netflix. You had to be a Netflix subscriber.
Well, I don't have cable TV, and I couldn't honestly tell you how I can even watch the Oscars. I have no idea. I don't even think I can.
Well, do you have an antenna? You can watch it on your TV.
No, I've got no cable subscription. So
you're ABC, folks.
Somewhere.
ABC
yeah, but you
TV.
don't need cable to pick up ABC on your local affiliate. Plug the antenna, Alex, into
what antenna? There's no antenna.
Well,
so
go down to Radio Shack.
This is a funny thing because I don't think people of Alex's age understand over-the-air broadcast.
No, I know what over-the-air means. But there's no antenna.
Oh, see, now I've insulted
There's no
him.
antenna. There's no antenna.
Well, I was joking that you could go down to your local Radio Shack store and get one.
Well, we used to have.
I mean, how far? What metro? Where do you live? What part of the world do you live in?
So I live in a city called. So I live in a city called Port Coquitlam. It's about 45 minutes away from Vancouver proper.
Okay, so you're in Western Canada.
Yeah, Western Canada.
Well, you could probably pick up the Vancouver, affiliate.
I was being
have to go on Amazon.
I was being somewhat difficult. I believe the Oscars. I think you have to have. I think you have to be subscribed to CTV. I think is the station that's broadcasting it. But I think you have to pay for it. So there is a way. If I wanted to watch it, I could pay probably for their subscription service and watch it. But I don't understand award ceremonies. I've never understood why people care about award ceremonies. I love movies. I'm an absolute cinephile. I watch so many movies. I watch old movies, new movies. I don't understand why people care about who wins an award for best actor.
It's all for Hollywood. They're all massaging their egos and doing it publicly.
And the winner of the awards, look, it's a subjective thing.
Sure.
And also a lot of the movies that were the winners of the best picture have not held up. Like Gandhi. Go back and watch Gandhi and look at the other nominees, where some fabulous movies that still hold up. It's a popularity contest, let's face it. But the nominees are all fabulous films in every category, and the actors and et cetera. And it's hard to say who's the best.
Not necessarily, because I think they're also spending. Now, please don't read into this. It's just an observation. They're spending a lot of time trying to be politically correct in terms of the proper balances of various ethnic groups and the content, and it's getting so political that it's hard to enjoy the show when there's a good story to be told, regardless of all those things.
Well, I think you're referring to the Oscars so white controversy about 3 or 4 years ago, and diversification.
Sacha Baron Cohen and his little commentary.
Yeah, I mean,
look, Ali G.
That's kind of a problem for the Academy to solve. I know a couple members of the Motion Picture Academy, look, they're old white guys, generally speaking, and they have done an effort in the Academy to get more active membership from, not just guys our age, men usually that are the voting membership of the Motion Picture Academy. If you want to,
you know what, that's a very true statement about the room full of white guys making the call, because I was talking to a friend of mine who works at Pixar. He's the CEO. And he said a lot of the shows that came out of Pixar when they were very popular, it was just a room full of white guys making a call on what they should do. And they've changed that. The Disney's required them to change that philosophy of doing that because it was so easy to fall into that trap. So, I applaud them for being more diverse in their presentation. I don't know
it's going to get more diverse anyway.
The
generations in power after us, we'll talk about ageism for a second. They are more diverse. I mean, workplaces are more diverse than we started our careers. and younger managers there are more people of color. There are more people, there are more openly gay and lesbian people involved in every aspect of the entertainment industry than there was in our generation. So that you're going to see, without, having to make rules about it, there's just going to be a change in, what kind of things win awards,
Right, and that's one of the reasons I think they're disconnecting with the Oscars, because they're kind of showing up. Look how diverse we are.
Well, it
Or
is
look
kind
how
of
cool we are
old-fashioned
now.
because, again, it goes back to what we only had 3 channels, and the Oscars had like 100 million worldwide audience every year. It was one of the touchstone events that everybody water cooler could talk about the next day, but that won't be the case tomorrow. There will be the majority of people in most workplaces, if people aren't working remotely, that are will have watched the presentation, maybe have not have even seen any of the movies that were nominated, because it used to be a blockbuster movie, The Way We Were. I would say half of all Americans probably saw the movie The Way We Were in 1975 when it was a top grossing film. But what movie do you know that everybody in your neighborhood saw last year? There isn't one. Yes, there was Barbie and Oppenheimer, and a lot of people saw them. But still, people's media, if all you want to watch is Japanese language action films, that's your media consumption. That's one of the reasons why the rates are up so high for NFL football, is that's the last remaining broadcast buy for advertisers, where they can get a large multi-demographic cume all in one place on one night at one time. So they're willing to pay, $12 million for 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And, to put it in perspective again, there was a time when I was programming top 40 radio stations, pretty big ones. We couldn't play 2 female artists back to back. That was the way it used to be.
Well, believe it or not, in country, there's a big controversy over that right now, because country music over the last 10 years has really excluded female country artists. And there's been a backlash about that from, go look up some of the interviews from Casey Musgrave, and they won't play, they don't want to have more than, 2 country women in the rotation at country music radio stations,
And one other little beef I have that I want to get out there before we wrap up things here. People, if you have an avatar, or if you've got your picture in a profile on LinkedIn or something else, please stop using a 20-year-old picture. That's turning into one of my big
then I'm in
Stop
trouble.
doing that. Stop
Thanks,
doing it.
Mitch.
Do not do that anymore.
The one I sent you is 17 years old.
Yeah, you're wearing a plaid jacket. I mean, it's just not. It's not. I'm not picking on you,
jacket.
Steve, but people that just, I've done the same thing. If you go to my LinkedIn page, it's like 30-year-old picture of my profile. Like, that's not me.
You know what's funny about that, Mitch, is that I've seen authors do this. If you look on the sleeve of the book, it's always an old photo, and I'm like, you don't look like that now. I don't understand how did that become a phenomenon?
I'll tell you why. It's because something we were talking about half an hour ago is ageism. And, even a book author, people are going to, I won't buy that book because the author's too old.
Oh, come on. You really think that actually goes through people's heads?
Yes.
I think it's a factor that a editor at a book publisher might think about.
Yeah, people are thinking too much about everything. I think it hurts my head to consider what people are going through.
I'm not sure they're right, but
we've had a great conversation here, and I think it's an excellent first show. And Steve, we'd like you to have come back more often, because we love your ability to caramelize everything. Isn't that a good term to use? Caramelize, make it all make sense.
Deglaze the pan.
Yeah, deglaze the pan. Heat it up, and with those big iron skillets. Anyhow, we want to thank you all for being here on our first effort. We encourage you to comment, say things you like, because we're going to try to morph this into what it ultimately needs to be. But I think this was a good start. It was fun. I think we covered a lot of bases. And I wanted to get out before the Oscars come on TV, because I know a lot of people want to switch over now.
Hey, listen, I think this is going to be a great podcast. I'll be subscribing and listening to it in the following weeks, and I'll
Thank
look
you.
forward to your guests that you're going to have down the road. And I think other people should tell people to smash that like button and subscribe.
And thank you so much for coming in, and you added a lot of you added your perspective. I thought you were fantastic. Really appreciate you being here.
Glad to
My
do
pleasure.
it.
Oh, you're talking about Steve.
I'm
Sorry.
talking about what? Yeah,
No, both of you guys. It's,
you're
it's a great
okay.
concept.
You're okay.
It's a
Mitch.
great
I was talking about
concept, and
Steve.
there's a lot of great radio older guys and some younger guys that you'll have as a guest over the next several months that will bring some interesting perspective. You should have Lee Jacobs on.
Yeah, he'd be good.
Yeah, you'll have Mike Schwartz, or Mike Rossi as he's known in the radio business, on.
Ray Quinn.
Ray Quinn will be on in one of these days. I'll heckle him. And
I want to get a current happening comedian, Craig Shoemaker. I'd like to get him on. He has a group of people that he promotes to.
Hey, I'd like
Craig
to
is-
remember one. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
It's Smiling Irish Kevin Fennessy's heavenly birthday today.
Oh,
So-
really?
We were talking about old disc jockeys, and nobody worked harder as a radio announcer. Worked in every size market from big to small. Was an incredible talent on air, and he and his brother, whose brother just passed away also within the last several months, they were great broadcasters of that 1970s mold. And I just want to remember him because I saw it pop up in my calendar today, and I really liked Kevin. And
Kevin would have loved this conversation because he ate, breathed, and was the epitome of broadcast radio. So,
absolutely,
Steve, before you do anything else today, fix your clock. It's still incorrect. You're going to miss all the big shows.
You're absolutely right. I'll have to advance it an hour, spring ahead, baby.
And we want to thank our 9 subscribers. We're up to 9. How about that?
And I just want
Up to 9.
Mitch, I'll let you have the last word, but just one last plug for our email address here. Please send us feedback to hello@thelastangrydj.com. We are working on a website as well, so we will do that, and we'll let you know when the website is live as well.
And I will thank you, Alexander, for being here to make this possible, because without your perspective, you need to balance out the ageism that's here. I'm certainly an older guy, but I appreciate the fact that you're here. I think you're going to add a certain spice to this conversation. Not only that, but you're the guy that's making all these technical things go together, because I don't know how to do a podcast. You made it happen, so thank you for your efforts.
Happy to be here.
Thank you, Steve. And that'll wrap us up for our first and foremost podcast. We'll be back again next Sunday, God willing, and the creek don't rise. Thanks so much.
There you go. See you later.